Welcome, everyone. I'm glad that you've been able to join us for the first of our 2019 Safe Havens webinar series, What's Faith Got to Do with It? Supporting Victims and Survivors of Faith. We're thrilled that you were able to join us. As I said, I'm just remembering how to move the screen along. So welcome. We are honored to be supported by the Office on Violence Against Women, and we thank them for their support. Today, we are doing this webinar with myself, Allison Morse-Katzman, and my colleague and Director of Safe Havens, Reverend Dr. Anne Marie Hunter. So I'd like to find out who is on this call. So if you could kindly type into the poll if you're an advocate or a rural advocate, a first responder, lawyer, etc. We would love to know who's on. So far, it looks like we have mostly advocates, some social workers and rural advocates, and some other people. Thank you for that. And I have one more question. I'd like to know what you're seeing out in the community that you're working in. Have you worked with faith-based victims? Have you worked with a faith-based organization? And what kind of relationships do you have with local clergy or faith communities? And you could kind of type that into the chat box if you want to answer that. So many of you have worked with faith-based victims, but not nearly as many have worked with faith-based organizations, and that's really interesting. We're hoping that by the end of this presentation, you will have a better understanding of how you might work with faith-based organizations in your community, and also to have a stronger understanding of the importance of faith. So today's goals. Move this along. Today's goals, you can see them right there, but we know that there are lots of victims of abuse who are faithful people. And partnering with faith communities and faith leaders can be one aspect of the community education and training that you already do or want to do. And that's what we're going to talk about today, to look at the opportunities for outreach and partnership building and to introduce some of our resources that we think might be helpful to you. Really and truly here, the key is working together. Safe Havens has been working with advocates and domestic violence and sexual violence resource centers for many, many years, and we know that you all have really, really important expertise. But we also know, because of our work with faith community leaders, that they have specialized expertise. And so we're hoping that we can help you figure out how to bring your area of expertise to the faith leaders in your community and combine your areas of expertise to help victims and get them to services more quickly. Really, we would love to see you have a new appreciation for what faith communities can do to partner with you and to reach victims and survivors. So, what is Safe Havens? Some of you may already know. I see some names on the list that I recognize, so you do know something about our work. But Safe Havens dreams of and works towards a world in which faith leaders respond compassionately and effectively to survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, and elder abuse. Safe Havens is a multi-religious agency. We work with diverse faith communities across Massachusetts and across the United States. Through our work with the Office on Violence Against Women. We promote safe and effective faith-based responses to domestic violence, sexual abuse, and elder abuse. So a little bit about the specific resources, and the resources that I'm talking about right now are the ones that were developed with funding from the Office on Violence Against Women. Our rural resources, the Hearts and Hands Toolkits, Piecing Together Faith and Safety for Rural Victims of Sexual and Domestic Violence. We developed a toolkit. It started by making a lot of phone calls and talking to advocates in rural communities and also faith community leaders in those rural communities. And we put together resources that are specifically for the advocates, but also resources specifically for faith leaders on domestic and sexual violence, what they can look for. We have some flyers for the restrooms to bring to the faith communities that you go to. We have a partnership guide, and we also have a training curriculum, and all those can be found on our website. Our elder abuse work has been done in partnership with the National Clearinghouse on Abuse in Later Life, and that's where faith and safety meet. Faith communities respond to elder abuse. And again, we have a toolkit for faith leaders and service providers with an outreach guide that helps service providers troubleshoot when they hear excuses or kind of pushback from faith leaders, as well as a partnership guide. And we have a training curriculum that is just been approved, and Safe Havens is looking forward to posting that on our website, and you can look for that soon, we hope. Our newest resources really are truly hot off the presses. They were just posted at the end of 2018 on our website, and they're entitled Pieces of a Bigger Picture, Faith Communities and Service Providers Working to Support Victims of Sexual and Domestic Violence. This toolkit is very similar in many ways to the rural toolkit, but it takes it's not as specifically for rural communities, and we have added some resources there, as well as including an outreach guide, a partnership guide, and a training curriculum. These are on our website, as I said, at the end of 2018, so you can take a look for them now.
So this is Anne Marie, and I'm so glad y'all are with us. Thank you so much. I just wanted to take a little bit of time here to make the case for why we think that it's important to think about faith if you're an advocate or a service provider serving survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, or in fact elder abuse. So I wanted to just make the case, if you bear with me for a minute, kind of the argument for why this matters. The first part of the argument is just that many Americans, as I'm sure you know, are faith affiliated. You can see how important faith is here for what we call the silent generation, the sort of World War II generation. And you can see that faith community involvement kind of drops off a bit with age. However, even with younger millennials, we're still talking about 64% of them identify forthrightly as faith affiliated. So it's important to know that more than 60% of any age group is going to identify as faith affiliated, meaning that faith is important to them. And the U.S. is also very religiously diverse, so that means that there are many traditions that a client that you're working with could be a member of, and many beliefs and cultural norms that could affect how a client understands what's happening or understands the options. Underserved communities, I think, are particularly important when we talk about faith, because faith in general is extremely vibrant and central in these communities that some might consider underserved. So rural communities, urban, low-income, religious and cultural minority communities, immigrant and refugee communities, these are all places, and I would add older adults, as you just saw, these are all places where faith is particularly vibrant and central, and where the faith community leader is particularly trusted, but also where the faith community might be the only institution available or the only trusted institution. So very important in that sense as well. So we know that there are many, many barriers to safety that clients encounter when they are thinking about what does safety look like for them, and what changes or what safety plan might look like, or what changes they might like to see in their life. One of those barriers, and a really important barrier, can be faith. So it's another reason why it's really important to take a look at faith. when you're working with survivors. We also know that many victims who are faith-affiliated may turn to someone in their faith community for help if they're facing abuse. This could be the faith leader, but it could also be someone in the choir or a scripture study course or the administrative assistant on Tuesday morning. Anyone in a faith community, we argue, just like anyone in the wider community, could be a first responder. So we really encourage faith communities to think of themselves and everyone in the pews, everyone who's a member or who is part of the group as first responders. So in that sense, faith can also be a tremendous resource as well as a barrier to safety. And it's important to appreciate that sort of double-edged sword nature of faith when it comes to your clients. So the Georgia Domestic Violence Fatality Review Team began raising awareness about the importance of faith in 2009. They had seen how frequently victims in their study group had turned to faith leaders or faith communities for support. So this for them raised an important flag for the need to pay more attention to faith and faith communities as we do the work. And there's so little research on victims in minority communities. There's tragically little research, but one study of older adults discovered that older women frequently named a faith leader when they were asked where they would turn for help if they were faced with abuse. So the older the victim, the more likely they were to name a specific faith leader or congregation when asked where they would turn for help. It's important to note what a resource this can be for folks. And for faith-affiliated clients, there's a direct linkage between faith and then concepts like marriage or intimate relationships or dating or gender roles. Now this quote is from a study of older adults, but even many younger people, I believe, fall back on the understandings of their family's faith tradition or cultural norms when they think about concepts like marriage or gender roles or relationship or healthy relationship, whether or not they're actually observant or faith-affiliated or not. I think that we all fall back on those family norms and traditions, cultural traditions, when we are kind of accessing our fount of information about what those things look like or should look like. So we've been arguing, we at Safe Havens have been arguing that if we want to meet victims where they're coming from and better understand what's happening to them, but also better meet their needs as whole people who have many facets and many complications and complexities, that we need to include faith communities and faith leaders, and that this is a great opportunity to get information out into the community and to connect with potential victims or folks who may be able to help the very clients whom you are working with.
So realtors would say location, 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 and in relationship to faith leaders, we would have to agree because trusted faith community members and faith leaders are really perfectly located to be a listening ear, to see or to hear what's happening in the lives of their fellow congregants, to recognize red flags, and to be a bridge to community services and resources. Faith leaders teach and have many opportunities to influence the community's understanding of healthy relationships and abuse. I mean, think back to what Anne Marie was saying when she was talking about how people, when it's time to get married or think about relationships, they often fall back on what they know based on their family's faith community. When faith is misinterpreted or misapplied to support abuse, faith leaders can respond. That's a huge opportunity for faith communities. Faith leaders can also stay alert for signs of abuse and provide resources early. They can raise awareness in the community in a way that, in restrooms or on bulletin boards or through programming, and they represent an invaluable opportunity to reach faith-affiliated people and the wider community with information about abuse, available resources, and life-saving support and safety. So many faith-affiliated clients are looking for guidance from faith leaders, so their relationship on this issue can really be effective. At the same time, victims of abuse who hear silence from their faith community about abuse are also receiving a really powerful message. If you go into a faith community and no one ever talks about any kind of abuse, then you think if you're a victim, you think that they don't talk about this here, or maybe it doesn't happen in this community. And we all know that it happens, domestic abuse happens in all communities. So working with your faith community is a great way to expand access to the services that your agency and you can provide. Oops. Sorry, everyone, I'm having some technical difficulties. We've heard from lots of advocates who've been able to leverage their faith community work to include the whole community. There are lots of ways, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, things as simple as tabling at a church event and offering brochures. But like I said, we'll get more into that a little bit later. So can you think of a faith leader near you who you might reach out to? And if you could just answer yes or no, and we'll come back to this. Oh, look at that. 100% of you know someone that you can reach out to. Well, then we better get to it because we don't want to waste any time here.
So,
oops, wait a minute. I think I went one too far for you.
Thanks. So in terms of increasing access to your services and expanding community engagement and responding to the needs of faith-affiliated victims, and indeed even for providing services that respond to the whole victim or the whole survivor, these faith community partnerships can be really, really important, which is why we do this work. We just think it's so, so important. So in addition to all those institutional reasons or sort of community education and outreach reasons to be working with faith communities, there's also the importance to the individual client who's sitting across the table from you as well. Most Americans turn to their faith for guidance and meaning and invaluable community connections that can be quite a network of support, for example, for survivors. So there's individual reasons to be concerned as well. As I alluded to earlier, for faith-based clients, faith can be absolutely critical in how they see the world, how they understand their own identity, how they make decisions, and then also how they find healing and wholeness. So, for example, we've worked with, we've talked to, I should say, survivors who have had great safety plans and really, but then sort of had trouble implementing those safety plans. And when the advocate said, what are some of the barriers to implementing the safety plan, a lot of the feedback had to do with faith. Either my faith leader won't support me if I do this, or I will be ostracized from my faith community, or these particular teachings are important to me and they seem to fly in the face of what the safety plan is telling me to do. So it's important that we tease out some of that if we can and help folks get past that so that they can live safer lives. And I don't mean get past faith at all. I just mean incorporate the faith into how we are talking about what happens next. We also know that abuse itself has a spiritual component, and that there is such a thing as spiritual abuse, for example, that a person could be forced to attend a certain faith community or forced not to attend, or they could have scripture used against them as a weapon, or the faith community leader can be, used against the survivor as a weapon. For example, when a faith community leader comes into court as a character witness, I would suggest that that's using the faith leader as a weapon against the survivor. So there's all these different sort of spiritual components as well to what's happening to victims. And victims tell us again and again that they suffer spiritually as well as physically, financially, and emotionally. So abuse, as you well know, I don't need to tell you this, has many facets and nuances to it. And the more of those facets and nuances that we can hear and understand, the better we'll be able to work with clients. So for any faith or faith community, there are ways in which a victim could perceive her faith as a support when experiencing abuse, and other ways in which a victim may feel that her faith is a barrier to safety. Again, it's that barrier roadblock thing. And I want to make very clear, this is across all faith communities, all denominations, all spiritual and religious communities. It's all of us. And I'm saying us as a faith leader here, that it's really the entire religious community that has to come to terms with this. But it's important to recognize that no one's experience with faith is entirely helpful or unhelpful, but rather that it's kind of this funny, nuanced picture. So let's look a little bit deeper in that and how faith can be a barrier to safety.
So earlier we said that many Americans are faith affiliated, and for those people, faith can really be a source of strength, of courage, and connection. But turning to a faith leader may not always be helpful to a victim of sexual or domestic violence or elder abuse. Sometimes tenets of faith have been misinterpreted to support abuse. Victims sometimes sacrifice their own safety to protect the abuser, to keep the family together, to safeguard the honor of the family, to uphold religious values such as forgiveness. Faith leaders have also not received training and resources about abuse. So as a result, faith leaders can be manipulated by abusers, and we have seen this many, many times when we meet with and train in faith communities. Faith leaders may misunderstand the seriousness of abuse. They may not understand what it takes for someone to unlearn how to be abusive. All of this means that survivors who are faith affiliated may face specific kinds of barriers to their safety and may have access to specific kinds of resources as well. So we're going to first discuss those barriers that Anne Marie mentioned. As I had said just a minute ago, that many faith leaders haven't received training and resources or the technical assistance they need to respond appropriately to victims of abuse. We have polled many faith leaders across the country and in the greater Boston area, and most of them do not have classes or any class or even 1 hour on learning about domestic abuse and learning how to address it in a faith community setting. So we wouldn't dream of sending an untrained firefighter into a burning building, but that's kind of what many faith leaders may feel like when it comes to abuse. In addition, Safe Havens has another sort of a theory as well. Advocates understand how victims minimize, but Safe Havens believes that people who are experiencing abuse, who go to their faith communities, they also sanitize. They don't want to use that ugly, graphic, profanity-laced language that describes what they've been going through when they talk to their faith leaders. So you may hear the terrible details of what is going on in that person's relationship, while the faith leader might hear, well, he's not very nice to me. So no wonder I look at you and say, why is she overreacting? And you look at me and say, why doesn't she understand how dangerous this is? And that's really that disconnect, which can be really difficult for faith leaders to understand. They're thinking, oh my gosh, this is not such a big deal. And in fact, the advocates, you all are understanding quite something very different. Faith leaders have simply not learned about how victims may minimize this abuse and how they may sanitize the abuse. They don't know how hard it is to talk about the abuse. In fact, if someone does come to a faith leader and talks about it, the victims don't want to be shut down. And if the faith leader doesn't understand that courage and strength that it takes for that victim to disclose anything, then that victim may be shut down for 20 years, like the quote says from the older survivor. And if they don't understand that, then they may not know how to respond effectively. At the same time, victims may be interpreting the abuse through their lens of faith. If a faith leader doesn't know how faith and abuse can intersect, they're going to be unable to respond to these calls for help. They may not be offering helpful interpretations of values and beliefs. So, abuse is often silenced and denied within faith communities. There was a small nationwide study of African American Christian congregations, and in that, the inability of either the congregation or the faith leader to acknowledge that abuse happens in their own pews was reported as the #1 barrier that kept victims of domestic violence from seeking help. We all know that denial and silencing occurs in all communities, not only the African American community. But this is a little bit of evidence that we can use.
So if faith leaders haven't received the training and resources that they need, the abuse may remain silenced or denied, and victims can be blamed or judged. If they do disclose, that disclosure may not be held in confidence like it should be. Either it can be talked about in the wider community, or sometimes faith leaders confront abusers. All too often, faith leaders just have not known how to listen to the experiences of victims and how to bear witness to the suffering that's happening in their own congregations. It's just too silent and just not heard. So with the very best of intentions, faith leaders, and I would include myself in this, we, as a faith leader, have endangered and prolonged the agony of victims of abuse for far too long, with all of the blaming and minimizing and judging and all of that goes on. And when we do respond, when we haven't completely silenced things to the point where we do hear a little bit, we sometimes respond with things that are re-traumatizing to the victim or unsafe. So we may suggest, for example, unsafe solutions like couples counseling, for example, or sometimes we jump in with quick fixes or sort of a glib forgiveness or pray hard or sort of a spiritualization of the problem and a kind of a quick fix spiritual answer. We may try to patch over things with couples counseling or marriage counseling, or we could just see a total dead end when it comes to a victim's search for safety. In other words, we don't refer them to anywhere, we don't give them any information or resources or let them know about your services or any of that. We just are a dead end. So all of these are very bad, obviously, for survivors. We really encourage faith leaders and faith communities to think about themselves as first responders and to know that they, like everyone else, need training and resources. But also we really focus on the need for partnerships with each of you or with your agencies so that we can be responding or supporting victims and survivors together, really. So we are all about building bridges between local faith leaders and faith communities and local service providers. And we say again and again that we cannot do what we do. We cannot do the faith community education and empowerment and training that we do unless you are doing what you do. We don't want faith communities to be doing this work on their own, in other words. So we're here today and the trainings that we do are really all about making this list of bad things that happen without training and resources, a thing of the past. And community by community, congregation by congregation, we are trying to make this list a thing of the past. Now, the good news is that faith can also be a resource for survivors. When faith leaders and communities really do get the training and resources and have partnerships with all of you, they can be much more effective as a resource. And they can really be allies in efforts to end abuse. So actually, let me go back for just 1 second and talk about that for 1 minute. We have, for example, heard from survivors who really were able to benefit from a faith leader and an advocate who both were supporting them. The faith leader has a very unique role in terms of supporting and answering spiritual and faith-based questions and helping to make the faith as much a resource and as little a barrier as possible, at the same time that all the services and so forth are available through the service agents. So it's really important partnership. So in terms of a resource, let me just talk for a minute about some of the ways that faith can be sort of what I like to think of as the anti-abuse or the opposite of abuse. For example, the very word religion comes from the Latin religare, and the ligare part of that, L-I-G-A, root means to connect or to bind. It's the same root as the word ligament, but connecting two things together or connecting many things together. So as you know from working with clients, abuse is very isolating. It's important to remember that religion can be connecting, and it can help bind people to things that are important to them, like their community, their memories, their language, their country of origin, the very identity, how they identify themselves as a family or clan or tribe or community or an individual, their history and everything that they are, the way that they even see themselves. And in addition, faith can help in the middle of the isolation to help connect people to whatever greater power or God or gods or creator or divine spirit, however they would name that. But it can keep people connected to sort of ground of their being in the midst of this unbelievable isolation that occurs, as you know, in abusive situations. Abuse also precipitates a lot of grief and loss. Often your clients, survivors, are stripped of things like jobs or children or homes or family members or friends. And faith or religion or spirituality can be a resource that survivors can carry with them into a shelter, into a new home, into a new setting, wherever it is they're going. It can be a resource that's very portable and can continue to support them as they move through all these very painful traditions. But it can also be a way to help them grieve those losses, because the losses are huge, as you know, and very traumatizing. So a person's spirituality, spiritual tradition, or faith could help them grieve some of what they're going through and the incredible losses. Abuse can also precipitate incredible confusion and a sense of chaos, and life is completely out of control. The rug is constantly pulled out from under you. I know you've heard all of this over and over again. It's just absolutely crazy-making to be a survivor of abuse of any kind. It's very disorienting. So one thing to know about faith is that it can provide structure that helps people stay oriented or reorient themselves or find their bearings or kind of stay centered in who they are and what their values are. So just as an example of that, there are some faith traditions where you face east when you are worshiping, or there are others where you pray facing Mecca, for example, 5 times a day, or there are different ways of orienting yourself in space towards something that's important. And that is one way that you can stay oriented. Faith also orients us in time, in the sense that there are usually, in many faith traditions, there are sort of liturgical seasons. So there might be a season of high holidays, or a season of penitence, or a season of preparation. And in all those, staying connected to those traditions can help people stay oriented in time, the same way that someone else might say, oh, it's football season, or it's baseball season, or it's spring training, or whatever. It's just a different way of orienting yourself in time and space. You may have clients who are really strongly faith affiliated, and for them, the approval or permission of a faith leader can be critical when moving forward with a decision or new action. We actually were working with the Maine Coalition, and Francine Stark, who is their director, mentioned that she had had a panel of survivors who were faith leaders speaking, I believe, to a group of faith leaders. This is a faith-based panel of survivors, and she summarized the event at the end by saying to each of the survivors, what is it that faith leaders can most do for you? What do you most need from your clergy or from someone in your congregation? And that the universal response was the word permission, that faith-based survivors are really looking for permission to do what they need to do to find safety. So this means that clergy and other people in the faith community have a tremendous ability to influence a situation or a decision-making process, or to help people find to help them find whatever safety means to them, and to make that consonant with their faith. Here at Safe Havens, one of the things we say is that no one should ever have to choose between faith and safety. And that's where we're heading, is that people can be both faithful and safe at the same time.
So not all victims are faith affiliated. They may be very spiritual, but they may not outwardly belong to a specific brick and mortar church, or they may believe in a variety of different faiths, different aspects. But regardless, everyone needs to be heard. All victims need someone to bear witness and need someone to accompany them on the journey to justice and safety. The work you do is critically important as you accompany your clients on their journey. And I encourage you to check out Jean Anton's book, Walking Together, A Guide for Domestic Violence Advocates. If you have a problem getting that, or you have a question, we can give you the information at the end.
It's about working with clients who are faith affiliated, and it talks about different faith traditions and what that might look like for the client.
So we talked about how faith leaders can not know how to respond to victims who come to them maybe hinting at abuse, but we also know stories of advocates who don't know how to respond to victims who want to talk about their faith. As a matter of fact, on one of our trips across the country, one of our trips across the country, we came in contact with a service provider. We were doing a training in that particular community, and she said, we're so thrilled that you're here because all of our victims are talking about their faith, and Safe Havens, we were thrilled because we want people to talk about their faith. So we asked what they do. We thought we would be able to learn something from that particular advocate. And the advocate said, oh, that's when I don't listen. I'm not interested in faith. Well, that advocate just missed a huge way to support that victim. So we really do want advocates to understand, and service providers to understand, that they should be able to welcome clients whether they're faithful or not. You should not establish any faith as normative, and you should avoid the assumption that of someone's faith affiliation. If someone comes with their head covered, that doesn't mean that they're a Muslim or an Orthodox Jew. You don't know, but you can always ask about support. other than, the support that you're providing? What other areas do you get support from? Listening carefully is hugely important, as you already know this. And listen respectfully, because if faith is important to your client, you want to be able to hear that. And you don't have to be a faith expert. That's something that a lot of advocates kind of stumble on. Oh, well, I'm Christian. I don't know anything about Judaism or Islam, or I'm Jewish and I don't know anything about Christianity. That's okay, because you don't have to know. You just like you listen in all other aspects to your victim, you can listen in this particular aspect as well. And then you can, if you have questions, if the survivor has questions, you can refer to Safe Havens, and we can provide you with a number of different resources in our bibliography. So one thing I would love to know, if you would be willing to type in, what's one way that you've seen faith act as a barrier or as a resource for victims? You can answer both or just one of them, but if you can type it in, we would really appreciate it. And I'm looking right now as people are starting to type in, and we can kind of address a couple of these. So as you're typing in, okay, wait, I see now, faith leaders who don't understand abuse and are manipulated by the abuser. And that is fairly common. We have seen that many times. Forgiveness, clergy like to forgive. All clergy we know like to forgive. Everyone likes to forgive. But advocates know that forgiveness is a lot different than just saying, oh, I forgive you. There's a lot of work to be done. In the Jewish community, for those of you who might know, I really find this very helpful. To forgive is, it's called tshuva, and it really means to return to your former self, to your better self. And it involves a lot of active steps, just like an abuser would have to go through in batterer's intervention. And so I like that way of forgiveness, if there's going to be forgiveness, and we know that there doesn't have to be. I'm looking at another one, faith leaders who encourage couples counseling. Safe Havens, when we do our trainings, we're all over that with the faith leaders. When we are doing a training, we want them to know one of the most important things is that they should not be doing couples counseling if they believe that there could be any abuse. And we talk about ways that they can make that, they can develop protocols so that they don't have to be seeing the couple together right away. Survivors who feel that to be a good Christian, they must show unending grace to their abuser at their own expense. That's a tough one. You want to talk about that?
Well, I think it goes along with forgiveness, actually, that just the thought that, and this comes, I think, from faith communities not having the kind of in-depth understanding of abuse that you all have. And that's why we need to do education, so that we can kind of bring them up to speed and let them know what an in-depth, dangerous, and difficult to change problem this is, and that it's not just something that is glibly changed overnight. And I think that's where we get into that, the unending grace or just forgiving somebody. But also the message to congregants needs to change. No one should have to sacrifice themselves on the altar of marriage or relationship. And I think faith leaders need to be preaching that and teaching that as well in their congregations. So there's a lot there to unpack. We don't want to see anyone sacrificing themselves for a relationship that's very bad. And you can see some of the spiritualizing and not really understanding the depth of what abuse can be in the religious community's response. And the great opportunity to assist victims and provide support, absolutely. We are right there with you. And that's part of why we're so passionate about empowering faith communities and faith leaders. We totally understand that it's been a rough road in the past, and we do not want to gloss that over or not appreciate the depth of the disconnect between advocates and faith leaders, but at the same time, we think that with some training and relationship building with all of you, that there may be hope that faith leaders, at least some faith leaders, would be able to be allies and really take a very different role. So let me get into those roles, I think, or it's just you, Allison, still. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So that brings us to a good point. What can faith leaders do? What can your local faith leaders do? And Safe Havens has kind of articulated three major roles for faith communities and faith leaders, as you can see here, and I'll take them one at a time. So earlier intervention, they probably aren't going to actually intervene, but they could intervene earlier along the way by breaking the silence in the community. They can acknowledge that abuse is not okay and that abuse is traumatic. They can offer theological, spiritual, and emotional support, and as we've been talking all along, be this bridge to resources and referrals to all of you. That's the earlier intervention. I have to say my favorite, well, I shouldn't say favorite, but prevention is really tangible for me, and it might be for you all as well. And if faith leaders understand, and they can actually start to prevent unhealthy relationships and get at the abuse before it starts by, inviting advocates, inviting you all to provide preventative education to young congregants. That's one of the great things about faith communities. They encompass people from preschool all the way up through young adults and older adults. So you can talk about, if you have the kind of programs in your agency, you can talk about bullying and what it's like to have respectful relationships. You can talk about how clergy can incorporate information in, about intimate partner violence in premarital counseling. Faith leaders can address issues they can address the issue with religious and moral authority in a way that advocates can't, but people come to faith communities and have a respect for their faith leaders, that when they talk about these things, people will listen. Faith leaders and faith communities can disseminate information. That's why we develop those bathroom and bulletin board flyers. Faith leaders can also set the moral tone for the community. They can support your agency. They can help challenge all the isms that are used as weapons against victims of abuse. And their public voice speaks really loudly when they condemn intimate partner violence and elder abuse, and they call for change.
So faith leaders and faith community members bring a lot to the table. They can provide that compassionate listening, the acknowledgement of the abuse, and spiritual material support. They can be a trusted guide to help people find safety. We talk to them all the time, for example, about referrals. And my experience of faith communities is that they're extremely relational, and people trust folks in their faith community. So if I, for example, as a faith leader say, hey, I just met this great advocate, her name is Nancy, here's her card, here's her brochure, she was really, really nice, these are some of the services they provide, I can sit with you while you call her. That is a completely different referral than call 911 or information off a poster or something like that. Great as posters are, great as 911 is. Just that the fact that my faith leader or my faith community trusts an agency means if I'm a member of that faith community that I can trust them as well, and I'm more likely to call. So that sort of trusted guide and trusted bridge to resources I think is huge. And then also faith leaders, if they're vigilant and know a little bit about what they're seeing, can also intervene earlier, as Allison said. So what we hope happens then, for example, I know as a faith leader I went into homes to visit folks in my congregation. That would be an perfect opportunity to pick up on dynamics, see things, or to understand the relationship in a little bit different way. Not that I would say anything about it right then, but then later if I saw someone whom I thought might be experiencing abuse, I could mention the services in the local community or offer to be supportive. So our idea then is that if we as a community are sort of on guard and providing those services and referrals earlier, that victims and their children would experience less trauma because with any luck they would get to services earlier. And also, if your long-term goal is to keep the relationship together, which many faith communities say that's their long-term goal, I argue with that to them that the best chance of that would be getting batter's intervention services to the abuser as early as possible as well. The earlier that I try to change that behavior, the better my success will be. So for so many reasons, it's so important to intervene earlier. And as I said earlier, it's just so imperative that we work together. And there has been this bad blood. There are times when I've heard from survivors that they felt like they had to sort of check their faith at the door when they went to the shelter, for example. But also there are faith communities that are preaching from the pulpit, don't call the service agency because they'll break up your family. So we have to get past this. Because the people who are falling through the cracks and not receiving services are the survivors. And it's just critically important that we build these bridges so that they're able to access the help that they need and get the spiritual support that they need as well to move forward. So faith leaders and advocates are not going to agree on everything. There's just, unfortunately, that's just the way it is. And also we've got to get over this unprepared, untrained, et cetera, barrier. But we have to at least find the trust and common ground to work together to respond to the survivors among us who so need our help and encouragement and support and services. So this mutual trust and collaboration is so important so that we can respond more effectively to the very complex needs of victims. Part of that is just role clarification too. So when it comes to building these community partnerships, it can be difficult. There's no doubt about it. We completely are, and we get it. We get it. What we found that's helpful is probably not going to be any surprise to you at all. We really have to listen to each other. We talked earlier, Allison talked a minute ago about the minimizing, which faith leaders don't know happens when they're hearing about abuse, if they do, and also the sanitizing that happens. So that means that I, as the faith leader, might hear, he called me names, whereas you, as the advocate, are hearing those terrible names, and that can lead to a disconnect. So we have to be able to listen to each other and understand the nuances of what each of us are hearing, and understand whole victims and survivors. We also have to identify shared values in the midst of values that we might not share at all. What are some of the values that we do share? I have yet to have a faith leader or a faith community person raise their hand and say yes when I say, do we want people in our congregations to be abused, any person in our congregation? So sometimes we start even at that very basic level of shared values that we all want the folks in our communities to be safe, and we want families and children and women and men and people of all gender identities and sexual orientations to be safe. So we also like to start building these community partnerships by starting very small, maybe with some of the congregations or faith leaders that you mentioned in the poll earlier that you felt that you could reach out to. Sometimes you can leverage an existing relationship. Maybe a congregation has been providing funding or volunteers, and you can widen that relationship. And then also we focus a lot on building a common language because there is sort of a domestic violence language that has some shortcuts in it, like referring to a restraining order as a TRO, for example, or a 290A or whatever, however people refer to the statute, for example, that's going to be just alphabet soup to faith community leaders who aren't part of the domestic violence or sexual assault or elder abuse world. But the same thing holds. Faith leaders need to learn that they have their own insider speak that doesn't necessarily help them communicate with advocates. So figuring out how we build a common language to work together is really important. And then the community partnerships, some of the ways to begin those relationships would be to consider maybe a site visit to a faith community, maybe cross trainings where you explain to a faith community what it is you do and they explain to you what they do. You could cooperate on projects such as the youth cell phone drive or maybe a domestic violence vigil in October, where they're inviting everybody in the the community, the schools, the law enforcement, police, etc., and do some kind of remembrance or vigil for survivors and victims of domestic violence. You can invite faith leaders to participate on any task force that you're on or roundtables, and even on your board of directors, and really try to bring them into that inner circle and help them see the world from your point of view. But then also invite faith leaders to look with you at the community from a victim's point of view and say, where are the barriers? What are the gaps in service? Where are places where cooperation is needed? Where are our survivors in our community not getting what they need, and how can we respond to that need? And then also, this is, I have to admit, my image of nirvana, but sort of developing this network of referrals and cross-referrals. For example, here in the Boston area, we have done enough training that when a victim calls here and says, well, I've had a terrible experience with my faith community or my faith leader, and we find out a little bit more about what their faith tradition or background is, we often know of a faith leader who kind of fits their background, whom we have trained and who can be helpful. So just that kind of referral and cross-referral can be really nice way to support survivors. We also model collaborative responses by learning together, learning about each other. When we come to communities to do catalyst trainings, we train advocates and faith leaders in the same room. It's sort of train the trainers for the advocates, but it's also a really great way to see where your faith leaders are in their understanding of the issues. We also encourage folks to begin with victims' needs and focus on the need to provide holistic care, and sort of explaining to faith leaders why you want to collaborate, how important their work is, and how it dovetails with your work. It's important that they know what services you provide, but also what you need from them. I mean, you are not, advocates are not going to be the ones who can reinterpret a particular scripture or talk in depth about what forgiveness might mean or what it might look like, or help people identify resources from their spiritual tradition. So you need faith community leaders to do that, or even to give permission for safety. But on the other hand, they are not the hotline. They are not the shelter. They are not the support group. And so they need your services as well. So how we can build those bridges and sort of nurture a coherent, coordinated community response. You've probably heard of CCRs, coordinated community responses. Allison and I talk about CCCRs. We add the word coherent, because what oftentimes happens now is that a victim hears from an agency, a service provider agency, I'm really concerned for your safety, there's help, there's services, we can help you, at the same time that they're hearing from their faith community, stay home, pray harder, keep this relationship together no matter what. So that is an incoherent response and just adds to the confusion and so forth that the survivor's experiencing. So we really think it's important that we're coherent, that we're on the same page.
Can I just interject?
Please do.
The importance of faith leaders understanding, faith communities understanding the work that you all do is so important. In one of the communities where we were training, we had part of our training is provides an opportunity for the service providers to come up and present the services, information about the services that they provide. And we had just finished with that part, and we're taking a break, and a clergy person came up to us almost in tears because that clergy person didn't know that the service provider offered this whole list, menu of services, and that particular clergy person a year before had a congregant come and talk about the abuse that was going on in her life, and that clergy person came in with the help of other congregants and helped the victim get a new apartment and secure a new job and find daycare, and they helped move her out of her house into this apartment. Well, it turned out that the victim was not qualified for the job, so she lost the job, didn't have enough money, couldn't afford the daycare, didn't have the training to get another job like that that would pay enough money, and ended up going back to her abuser. And the clergy person that came up to us didn't realize that in that particular community, the service provider could connect the victim to job training, had vouchers for housing, had connections for daycare. All of that could have been done through the service provider with the support of the clergy person, but that clergy person didn't know that the service provider even existed. So we really do encourage you to go out and educate your faith communities about the services that you provide. It doesn't, you all have connections to a lot more than support groups and the hotline and shelter, and that's important for clergy to understand, that it really is a real wraparound care that victims need and not just one particular thing.
Or even that any one of us would be able to meet all the needs of a survivor. It really takes community partnership. So we also encourage you when you're talking to faith leaders to explain safety issues and never, ever, 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 ever compromise on safety. That's the one, for me anyway, when I'm working with faith leaders, that's my one sort of hard and fast line in the sand, cannot be crossed. But also ask them to help you respond better. Explain, for example, you know what, I'm sitting across the table from survivors of abuse who are saying to me, oh, I'm supposed to turn the other cheek, or this is just my cross to bear, or whatever it is you're hearing from your survivors that you're working with. Explain that to them and say, we really need your help to respond to some of these faith-based issues that are affecting our survivors, and what would that look like? How could we partner? And just talk to them about what you're seeing. And be sure to, as Allison said, describe your mission and services really carefully. Do not assume any basis of expertise on their part. So even something that would be just second nature for you, like saying we provide support groups, that may not be clear to a faith community leader what that means, or even what the hotline is, or what shelter might entail, or how long someone can stay, or how they would qualify, all of that. Just please give them some detailed background so that they can understand and kind of get into your world a little bit and understand what it is that you provide. So this quote really from Wendy Lipschitz is really an eloquent testimony to how a victim's life can be transformed when they find that they're not alone and that they have their faith community at their back, and how important that is for many survivors who are faith-affiliated.
So this particular quote, clergy need a wider strategic plan for addressing this in the congregation, not just a one-time training. I think that's really important to keep in mind. So often we get clergy and faith communities who say, okay, come on in and let's have a training about domestic abuse, and then they say, okay, well, we're done now. But really, this is a marathon. This isn't a sprint at all. Domestic violence is unfortunately not going to be solved. The issue is not going to be solved. Maybe it's getting better, but it's still going on, and we've got to be in this for the long haul, and we want our faith leaders to be in this for the long haul. And if that's the case, then really do what you can to prepare for the long haul. nurture those lasting relationships with faith leaders. And a lasting relationship, ideally it will be a long-term one, but clergy, just like advocates, change positions and they move on. So if that happens, go back to that faith community. And when it doesn't work, move on. You're not going to be able to change the minds of everyone or even be able to get everyone to understand. And if you're hitting a wall, that's the time to move on. That's okay. You've got to give yourself permission to do that.
Could I just say something there, if you don't mind?
Of course.
I just wanted to mention that as much as survivors may need permission from their faith leader to access services to reach for safety, I think sometimes advocates, I hate to say it quite this way, but I hope you all hear that we're giving you permission. There are some faith leaders out there who are probably going to be very difficult to move on this topic, and there are so many others who are open to hearing and learning. So I would really encourage you to spend your time as much as you can, at least initially, on those faith leaders where you can really have a win, where it's really going to make a difference. Once they've got some information and training, they're really empowered to work with you and to support your work. Those who are very, very, very difficult, and there have been faith leaders that even I have not been able to work with, either they insist on compromising safety or whatever it is, it's okay to move on and just know a couple of things. First of all, that you've planted some seeds. But second of all, you can ask the faith leaders that you are working with and who do understand your work to hold their peers accountable, to hold their colleagues accountable, and kind of ask them to help you recruit that person into a training or something like that. But also know that sometimes this sort of change takes a very long time. We have worked with faith leaders who initially we just were sort of despairing of, but over time things have changed and they have become allies. So it's a very patient game, but just please don't burn out on those faith leaders who are going to take more time and effort.
You can use your connections. Maybe you have someone on your board or a colleague who is connected into a faith community. Go in and reach out to that faith community then. We call that the low-hanging fruit, and we say, by all means, take advantage of it and leverage, leverage, leverage. Once you've connected with one or two faith communities, like Anne Marie said, have those faith leaders or people in that faith community introduce you to other people that might be interested in learning more about your work and how you do your work and how they can be a resource for victims of abuse.
Or maybe they can get you on the agenda of your community. There's usually some kind of clergy consortium or clergy alliance that meets once a month, often for lunch. Sometimes they can get you on the agenda or introduce you once they get you on the agenda and talk about how important your work is and then let you talk about your services. And that's often a good way to connect with other faith leaders.
It doesn't have to even be, you can connect with faith leaders and faith community members. You don't have to, we encourage you to go and meet with them so that they can learn specifically and to meet you, but maybe you start out a little bit in a different way. I mentioned tabling at an event. Maybe they have their annual summer bazaar, and maybe you can have a table there with your brochures or your and you can have a game that kids can come and play, just so that people get to know you, people in the community get to know you and know who you are, and they say, oh yeah, they were at our summer bazaar or whatever the event could be. There are so many ways to do outreach, and I know that you all know so many of them as well already, because you do it in so many other areas, but don't be afraid to include the faith community in that outreach. So I want to find out if you could type in, if you will consider using any of these strategies to partner with faith leaders and communities in your area. We hope that you will. We are here to help you and assist you as you do that. If you have questions or you want more information, Safe Havens is here to help you make safe and safety an option for all faith-based victims. That is really what we are here to do. We would love to hear more about how you are partnering. So if you have information that you'd like to share with us on separately on a side note, or you can feel free to email me. I would be welcome your emails. I'd like to take a yes.
Were you going to take a second to talk about the Catalyst?
Yes. I'd like to take a second to plug our upcoming trainings. We have 5 slots right now between now and the end of 2019, where we will come out to your community to do a training with you, your agency, and your faith communities. And if that's something you're interested in, by all means, please reach out to me, Allison. Our email address is going to be coming up in a second. And we would be happy to talk to you about that, but not just for us to come and do a training, but if you have questions, part of the work that we do with OVW is to provide technical assistance. So if you have questions or you want to troubleshoot, we can do it via email or phone call or even Skype if you prefer. But that is what we're here for. If you have a flyer that you've used that you don't think is helpful, or if you have a question about how you're working with a particular community or a program that you want to do, we're here for all of that, and we hope that you'll reach out to us. This quote, "Wherever clergy are trained, abuse should be on the top of the list." This was from an older survivor in a focus group that we did, and that we really believe that wherever clergy are trained, abuse should be on the top. And you all can help make that training be at the top of the list in your communities. So I'd like to take a second to thank the Office on Violence Against Women for funding Safe Havens, and to NCJ-SCJ for their help with this webinar, and most importantly to all of you for listening to us. I would like to offer the opportunity to ask questions, and if you have questions, you can type them in the chat box, and we'll see if we can bring them. We are really, this is our passion, and working with all of you and helping you all bring, get increased access to your services is what we want to see.
And I wanted to just mention, too, while you're typing, that the Catalyst trainings that we do in local communities, such as your own, are completely free to the community. We have written those expenses into our OVWTA grant, so if you'd like us to come, there isn't any financial burden on yours. So your burden is recruiting faith leaders and the time that it will take for your advocates to do the outreach and recruitment, and also for the advocates to be part of the training. But other than that, it's pretty much our burden in terms of expense.
I would also like to point out that there will be, I believe that NCJ-SCJ will be sending an evaluation. If you would be kind enough to respond to that evaluation and include any comments that we can use, so that when we report back on the work that we're doing, that is always incredibly helpful. Also, if you are interested in getting our mailings, please include your name and address, because we don't have access to that right now. We would be happy to include you on our emailing list. And if you have other questions, again, please don't hesitate to reach out. I noticed that the email address here is info@interfaithpartners.org. If you want to email me directly, it's A.M. Katzman, so it's A, M as in Mary, Katzman @interfaithpartners.org.
And the other thing is that all of our resources that you'll see on our website, which you can download in color and black and white and copy as much as you want, but also we can send you print copies as well. So if you know that you're going to be doing outreach to 10 or 15 faith leaders and want us to send you beautifully printed toolkits for faith leaders, we're happy to send those.
It would be our pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, I don't see any questions. So I think we will call it a wrap. Thank you all very much. Have a happy Valentine's Day or Galentine's Day or whatever it is you're celebrating today, if anything. I hope that your Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month is going well and that everyone dressed in orange on Tuesday. And I thank you all so very much for your time. Take care. Thank you.
See you soon.